So we're here today to talk about this continuing event. It's slow, moments a little bit like being in the left field, moments of boredom punctuated by minutes of sheer terror, and we've had all of those over the last month. But the lake keeps, the situation evolves, and so do some of our predictions and planning. We're now using a number of 343.5 as a planning number, and this is the number we're using, I'm going to explain a little bit later, to analyze what we need to do to protect against rising waters. It's and what residents should be using as well, and it is extremely complicated, and we'll get into some of that, where each resident, if you're on the lake, depending on whether you're in an area that gets prone to wind versus calm, may make a difference between how high you actually build your measures. So this will continue to evolve. The snowpack at higher elevation continues to melt. We're about a third now down, but there's still lots of snow that has to come down. That's the main driver of lake levels because it flows into Mission Creek, and of course Mission Creek is the big artery. We have a number of creeks that feed in. That's the largest. Temperatures, as you see today, will warm up over the next couple of days, and you can pretty much watch the graph, and Mission Creek will start picking up steam. Unfortunately, by the weekend, we should have cooler weather, slow the melt down, but of course we're going to be adding rain to that. And rain is one of the wild cards that makes this so difficult to predict. Another is groundwater. Groundwater seems to be a factor, and it's not something that's easily determined as to how much that's adding to this. And it's also something that our homeowners have to deal with, because we can hold back the lake with sandbags, but we can't stop groundwater from seeping up. So throughout the city over the next month, you'll see roads partially closed or closed as groundwater now moves, as the lake level moves up, starts moving up into some of the roads. And again, very difficult to control or predict. Working with our regional partners and the other senior levels of government, we did some predictive modeling, and that's some of the things you see today. Team of data analysts looking at every bit of information that's available on the web. You've all seen it. Lake levels, historic lake levels, snowpack, rain. Took all that historical information we could and started to see if there were patterns that we could help use to determine where we might be for planning purposes. And that's where the 343 came up. So we used historic lake levels, snow melt rates, how much water is let out at the gates in Penticton, historical weather patterns, and even wind mapping to try to determine what some of those levels may actually hit. So snowpack, it's a great example of one of those numbers. Right here on my left, you see a graph showing the snowpack, and what you see is that it's actually late this year, and that's led to some of the questions where people say, why did they let out water earlier? Well, it's also late. It was almost looking like a lower than average year, and then we got great spring skiing. Not that anybody necessarily loves great spring skiing, but that's what happened. So you can see this, the graph, the red graph is 1990, and you can see the melt went way out and then down. 1997, which is a year that tracking very similar to this year, except for we're a little later in everything, followed this trajectory to the freshet ending about June 11th. It went as late as June 25th in 1990, and 2017, as I said, seems to be tracking at least on the same trajectory that we saw in 1997, that would put the end of the freshet around June 17th, June 15th, 17th. This shows, again, and this is all information that's readily available on the internet. Same thing, this is the actual snowpack, and you can see that it's starting to really drop, and dropping at a very steep angle. We took a lot of this information and started putting it together, and really the last graph shows the red again, 2090. No, sorry, it's the slowest melt, or the fastest melt that we've had. The purple line is the longest time it took for the freshet to to melt, and I believe it's from 400 millimeters. So taking a point of when the snowpack's at 400 millimeters, how long does it take to melt? And the black line's the average. The blue line is us, and we're tracking along that green line. And so some of the information that we then looked at and said, okay, if we're following that green line, that's the one that seems to be tracking in a number of areas, what does that look like? And it's through some of that information that we were able to come up with the 343.5. But again, there's multiple inputs. The lake will stabilize, but it'll take a long time. I think it's really important for people to understand that it's just not going to stop one day and then, within a week be gone. It could take a very long time for that lake to recede. If the lake levels are being let out at current rates, we're talking about 11 centimeters. As you could figure out, 11 centimeters a week. It could take an awful long time to get back to something that resembles normal. And so what does that mean? That means that the sandbags will be in place waiting for wind events. We saw some of those wind events the other day, just last night in fact, and until the lake stabilizes and starts drawing down, it's going to be a slow recovery as we try to bring the cities back to a normal state. I should say that the rise will slow down. The lake's gone up at a slower rate last night. Pick up for the next couple of days with the warm weather. We've ordered, we have an additional 200,000 sandbags that were brought in. We're trying to get another 500,000 that's expected today or tomorrow. And those sandbags and the sand and the ability to fill them and the ability to get them on site may take some time. So we ask for patience. It doesn't look like anything's going to rise all that quickly. So we ask for some patience from our citizens as we prepare to go through and determine where we need to shore up. And we ask individuals, and now you've been on the waterfront, you've been looking at this for a while, you saw the effects of the windstorm. You probably have a pretty good idea how many more sandbags you might need yourself without necessarily surveying it. And I'd like to acknowledge the landowners and the local partners and all the guys that we don't see but are out there working for local government in their public service areas and public works. They've been working long day and nights in Peachland and Lake Country, Kelowna, everywhere to try to get those sandbags in place and monitor them and fix them every single night.
The planning team has basically taken the new predictive 343.5 level and produced a series of flood advisory maps, which we are sort of just in process of releasing. And really they show two things. One is what the surface mapping would look like, what the surface water levels would look like should the lake reach 343.5. That's the red maps that you're seeing displayed here today. And also we're working currently on what that subsurface mapping would also look like. And that subsurface mapping is the area below the ground level where the water table will rise, which you may not see on the ground, but you will see if you're a resident in those areas, in those neighborhoods that are close to the lake. You may see it show up in your basements. You may see it show up in some of your sumps in areas like that. That information is just being prepared right now. We will be releasing it shortly. So what we're seeing here in these red areas is the 343.5. Our areas of primary concern are really in the city of Kelowna, essentially between Poplar Point and in the Manhattan Point areas. We're looking from the bridge down to the Kelowna General Hospital, as well as the areas just on the window over there in the mouth of Mission Creek, and that's the areas directly related to the Trustwell, Bluebird, and Cook Road areas. As well, we've also identified areas in Peachland in the area of Beach Avenue as well as Lake Avenue, which we may be seeing some of that inundation areas or areas where you're going to see some of the groundwater rising. And as you can appreciate, and as Ron had mentioned, that it's a little bit difficult to maybe envision and even predict sometimes where the water will rise, especially considering the amount of work that's going on right now in the field by our operations staff in actually lowering those levels. And the reason we're not seeing a lot of this red area right now is because it hasn't quite reached that level, but also because of the work that many staff are doing today. The other work that we've been putting together is regarding wind and wave action events. And looking at the, I guess really we've really had 2 wind action or wind events since the start of this flooding event. Trying to determine, what areas or properties are really prone to those high wind events and what kind of additional protection measures that they will need to put in place to ensure that their properties are protected. So we will be presenting or providing some wind and wave action mapping shortly also. And in recognizing that these are property specific, I think many of the property owners will already have a good grasp as to how much more they will need to go up, but hopefully this will help them sort of bring that in line.
So with the updated planning level that we have now for Okanagan Lake, I'm just going to give you some background of the flood protection works that we've already put in place and also what new work we'll be undertaking. So as most people know, significant work has already occurred over the past month within the central Okanagan. All the partners that we have, including installing large pumps in low-lying areas to protect key infrastructure, communities. We have in place kilometers of barrier dams in various locations along the creeks and the foreshore, as well as installation of gabion baskets and a million plus of sandbags out there. Local government crews, BC forestry crews, been deployed to inspect the barriers almost on a daily basis, and particularly after last night's wind. They've reviewed vulnerable areas and make the necessary requirements. And a typical day for the crews would be to respond to the calls that we've had overnight, go out into the various areas, take a look at the protection measures we have in place, do any repairs or modifications to those, come back, and then get tasks to complete for that day. So as Ron mentioned, it's not just foreshore properties that are being impacted. Many areas are also being impacted by high groundwater levels, and Brent mentioned that some additional mapping of that is going to come out. But as an example of that, if you go down Richter Street today, just north of the Lakeshore intersection, you'll see water pooling on the roads right there. It's just a low elevation section of Richter Street, and this, as the next couple weeks, month goes by, I think it's important to note that you'll be seeing this in more and more locations where the water table is going to rise to the surface, and I think, as Ron mentioned, that we'll could have periodic or sustained road closures and/or detours as time goes by. So we would certainly ask that people, if they are pumping from their basements, crawl spaces, weeping tile systems, their yards, to pump to natural areas if possible, and not into our sanitary system or into the adjacent storm system, as those would already be overloaded. All of the local municipalities are evaluating the key infrastructure as it relates to the new planning number of 343.5, and will be bolstering or adding additional protective measures to compensate as required as they find low spots in their system. For example, within the city of Kelowna, we'll be looking at enhancing protective measures around the Kelowna General Hospital, including some barrier dams and sandbagging. Additional sandbagging at the mouth of Mill Creek was completed yesterday, and we'll also be reinforcing the existing protection measures at the mouth of Mission Creek. We're looking at the conditions of Poplar Point Road, Manhattan Point, the areas around Lake Avenue, just south of the bridge. These are all very low-lying areas, so we'll be looking at that and seeing what additional measures we can put in place there. And particularly key infrastructure, pump stations, lift stations near the lake in various low-lying areas there. In Peachland, currently there's surveying going on along Beach Avenue, and we're looking at employing flood mitigation measures along Beach Avenue in the low-lying areas, and just determine what the extent of that is with the survey information that we'll get back. In West Kelowna, continuing to assess and provide the flood protection and pumping down in the Green Bay areas and Galatly Bay areas, and looking at increasing those as required. Within the regional district, the West Side wastewater treatment facility, that's continuing to be monitored every day, and overland flow through Pritchard Park would be maintained there as well. So we've been in touch with all of those partners, as well as Ministry of Transportation, Fortis Gas and Electric, BC Hydro, Interior Health, and how can the residents help themselves? Just make sure your properties are well protected. Again, pump to natural areas if that's possible. And we'd ask the public to also stay off any of the flood protection measures. You know, I think it's quite an attraction. I've seen a lot of kids jumping on the barrier dams, and it's but just for their own safety, as well as protection of the measures themselves. So jumping, climbing, things like that. And also, if you notice that there's any of the protection measures, such as the barrier dams, that you see the water coming out of, or doesn't look right to you, please call our number here at 250-469-8490.
Ron?
Have you counted the number? Take the map on the right, your immediate, yeah, that one. How many properties that encompasses?
We actually haven't done a tally at this point. I think probably the more pertinent map to be evaluating would be the flood advisory map that includes the groundwater inundation zone, because then that's the properties that may see impact in their basements. So that's something that we can certainly put together as part of our mapping exercise.
And is that that map right beside you shows the groundwater as well as the water coming over from the lake?
This map right here is our surface water. So that is the elevation, proposed or predicted elevation of the lake. It does not include groundwater, as would come further away from the lake, particularly any of the red areas, or in West Kelowna there, in the Pritchard area, you know, additional areas in Green Bay, any of the areas away from
So
the
that
lake.
map shows all of City Park being inundated. To what depth? Are we talking an inch or a foot of water there?
That really depends on the topography. So the further you get away from the lake, obviously, the less it could be smaller and smaller incrementally. We'd have to look more specifically, but that really just shows the edge of that 343.5. Excuse me?
Is that with protection or without?
That, at this point, that includes without protection, and that's one of the reasons we're not seeing a lot of water in these red areas, is because of the significant amount of protection that's occurred on site.
Are you happy with the protection that you had initially up to 343, but now you're going to 3435 with a buffer to 344.1? How much more do you need to add?
Well, I think at this point we continue to follow the provincial predictions, and we'll continue to you know, change our game plan and look at things differently based on those predictions. And we're feeling very comfortable with where we are right now, and also very comfortable with the level of protection that's been put out there. And as seen, again, on the ground, we're not seeing these impacts, and that's largely due to the amount of protection that's out there.
Yeah, I think so far we could say that, that what we've put up in place has generally, you know, worked. It's difficult. We had a minor breach in the Bluebird area with the wind damage, like debris knocked some sandbags. You know, certainly at those levels, should we'd reach those levels, you know, it'll put that much more strain. And I think the real worry is the amount of time they have to stay in place. You know, wind events particularly are the ones that are the most frightening, because, as you know, they could kick up pretty high, pretty quick, pretty violently, and really only hit a certain area, right, as opposed to broad wind. So those are the types of things we're trying to deal with. And again, Alan could fill you in, but we're not just raising all the sandbags a certain height. We're really looking at area by area. We have very detailed maps of everything we've put in place and their elevation, what's in place. And right now, what everyone's doing is actually kind of ground truthing it, going out there, looking at what's in place. And then they're going to make a determination. In some cases, we may actually choose to, you know, sandbag behind an aquadam, or an aquadam behind sandbags. So they'll really be dependent on the locations and their propensity to get some wind damage.
What's the predicted date for that to be achieved, 343.5, based on that modeling?
I think it's June 17th is sort of, I mean, it's, you know, it'll depend on whether it rains hard or whether it's hotter than predicted. It's not an exact science, but it's around June 17th. I think we all agree that most of that snowpack will be done.
So theoretically, it could go higher than that 343.5.
Yeah, and things that would draw it higher is rain. June is our rainy month, and we've looked at historical rain patterns, and hopefully it's not 1990 where we had a lot of rain, big storms in June. That would be very difficult. It would go up higher. We're looking at tracking some of the historical weather. Looking again, 1997 seems to be characteristic, where they had one big event at 15 millimeters that caused a spike. So those are the types of things that we've been looking at. So rain will be the wild card.
The 4 days of rain that we are getting, potentially over Thursday through Sunday, will that have a big dent in the rise of Okanagan Lake?
It'll depend on how much we get and where we get it. As you know, if it lands in the snow shed, it's got to go into the lake. I mean, everything in this area ends up in the lake. That's part of the problem. So what they're predicting probably won't be a huge blip. It's really what comes after and how we get through this month. Usually by the end of June, the warm weather kicks in and we don't get a lot of rain once we move past the end of June into July. Last year was been more rain. So once we get past this point, we're hoping that the normal pattern starts kicking in with less rain, but it's weather.
A couple of weeks ago, Brian Reardon said that about $3 million has been spent so far by the municipalities and the province dealing with this. Has that figure gone up? And if so,
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely. I don't have the exact figure, but it would certainly be double that.
It's tough to hear and certainly frustrating because there's really not a lot we can do other than making sure our residents are prepared. And so it's certainly hard to hear. But I also know too that we've done all we can, although you've heard now that we need to do a little more. But I think what's important to point out too is that when you hear 343.5, and when you look at the maps and you see all of the areas of Kelowna in red, keep in mind that a lot of the water is being held at bay because of the protection that's in place right now. So while the maps and all of the red you see may look devastating, keep in mind a lot of that water is being held back and a lot of the damage is being mitigated by the hard work of men and women at the municipal level, at the provincial level, who have been here helping.
You heard them. They initially built the defenses to 343 with a 60 centimeter buffer, but now they're sort of getting close to that buffer, and they seem pretty confident that what they've done should hold in most places.
Well, I mean, again, it's a waiting game, right? And the real wild card factor here is weather. And again, any amounts of rain are only going to make this problem even worse. So we are making decisions based on the most current information we have. And so the most current information we have says that we need to increase our protection. And so we would encourage residents to keep doing what they can to add to those sandbag walls and anything else that they're doing to protect their homes. And we will be doing the same when it comes to vital city infrastructure and city-owned property.
You've made it clear you'd like to see people stay off the lake or be careful on the lake. And if you look out today, I mean, it's pretty quiet out there. Do you think the message is getting across?
Well, I think people are getting the message that, if you're out on a boat that throws up a big wake, it is going to cause problems and cause damage and add to flooding of residents. And so we are, happy to see that people are heeding that message. But I also know how devastating it is for some of our local tourist operators who, as a result of my messaging, are seeing, some of their customers cancel their plans. And so certainly my heart goes out to our tourism operators who are being affected by this. But we have to remember that this is a very extraordinary event. And certainly tourism will be down as a result of it, but we're also trying to balance the message with the fact that there are a lot of other great things to do in our community, and so we will continue to put that message out and encourage people to come visit Kelowna. But I know that this is hard on a lot of people, not just people who are having their homes damaged by flooding.
Do you have any other messages you want to say to the people who may be under threat from the water?
Well, I think my message would be again is just do what you can to be prepared and continue to build up the defenses around your home. We're asking that people who have pumps perhaps in their basements, we ask that if it's possible that they pump that water to natural areas around their home as opposed to into the storm drainage system or the sewers because they're running at max capacity. But again, just do what you can. And again, check in on neighbors. Make sure that if you have neighbors that need a hand, make sure they're looked after. Make sure that family and friends are looked after. And again, let's continue to work together as a community to make sure that we're all safe.